Good evening. This is the 10th part of this series. If you're thinking of just diving in right here, well, I'm really advising against it. Your best bet, if I were you, click on over to the first installment of this series, a video called The Woman with 1.5 Hands. Watch that one, then watch part 2, then part 3. In other words, watch them in order. It's for the best. Anyway, here's part 10, or acceptable collateral damage? The best pianist ever had the unfortunate habit of naming his compositions with unprintable titles. After playing a number, he simply blurted out to his transfixed, euphoric listeners its inappropriate name. Audiences quickly went from beaming serene rapture or uproariously applauding to quietly mumbling to each other while wearing looks of curiosity and even pique. In a word, they were disconcerted. Subsequently, he lost gig after gig. He ended up at a rustic bar, a bit different than Carnegie Hall, where he had played not once but twice, and was paid rather modestly, but only on the condition that he never speak on stage at all, just play. This modest sum he nonetheless greatly appreciated, as he had been unemployed for a spell. He set about plying his trade, tickling, how you say, the ivories, again to rave reviews, literally to standing ovations in between tunes most nights. Formerly, this had been a dank watering hole where people drank and talked loudly, but no longer. His talent had changed all that. Other acts were canceled. It was his bar now. One night he took a break, went to the restroom, and right after leaving, while he made his way down a dark corridor and back to the stage, a man nervously approached him and said, "Do you know your fly's open and your penis is hanging out of your pants?" To which the pianist responded, "Know it? I wrote it." This pianist never existed, of course. The above is something I heard Robin Williams say, but not in person. I included it here as a way of introducing the book Suicide by Emile Durkheim. It's widely accepted as his most influential work, and he's said to be the number 3 figure in all of sociology. It has one of those titles, though, that can be taken the wrong way, very easily, if that's as far as you get. The trick is, don't go to the bathroom, don't talk to anyone who does. Instead, just listen to the music. The trick is, forget the title. Try not to be offended. I know some will, but try not to be offended by the name. After summarizing Durkheim's book, without a title that we're not going to think about anymore, I will ask if suicide prevention principles contained in it just might be transferable to areas of rape prevention. First off, an example of transferability is in order. Here comes a completely different topic, but the contrast between what is and what isn't transferable is night and day, unmistakable, and thus useful. Our example starts off with Alcoholics Anonymous, an organization that spawned Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, and Gamblers Anonymous, to name but a few. Do the principles that have worked for so many in terms of alcohol consumption work for others who also want to remain anonymous? Some do, some don't. With Narcotics Anonymous, the goal of complete abstinence, the equivalent of an alcoholic never imbibing alcohol again, can be attempted and attained, and this according to many professionals in the drug and alcohol rehab industry. Are those involved with Overeaters Anonymous, on the other hand, encouraged to employ this same abstemious principle? No. All members are expected to ingest a modicum of that which nourishes, even if it's with a feeding tube, i.e. involuntarily. Point: sometimes principles are transferable, sometimes they're not. Back to Durkheim. Here's a quote from Suicide. "No unhappiness in life necessarily causes a man to kill himself unless he is otherwise so inclined." End quote. And here's another quote. "No collective sentiment which is to say, no social forces can affect individuals when they are absolutely indisposed to committing suicide. End quote. Those quotes can be found on pages 306 and 322, respectively, of the 1951 English translation, edited by George Simpson. A preliminary comparison of those quotes to our topic might go as follows. If person A commits suicide with a gun, person A's finger is the only finger on the trigger of that gun. Likewise, if man A rapes woman B, man A is 100% responsible for that rape, and woman B is 0% responsible for her own rape. Now, while the above does not align to an exact one-to-one correlation, it is certainly close enough to warrant further investigation, which we'll get right to. Unfortunately, I fear, and focus groups have confirmed, that for many of those who have gotten this far, that at this juncture there might occur bridling rather than champing at the bit. Yes, we've left behind most of the doubters right at the onset of the early reviews. Would-be YouTube viewers who think leaders of the anti-rape industrial complex, or Terrico, are doing a fine job, and a polishing or revamping of their message is not necessary. Others have dropped off along the way, and for various reasons, explored in the addenda. But now the message seems to be approaching a moment of yes, but, like there's some hedging on the horizon, and it's only a matter of time before viewers are asked to accept the equivocating, the waffling, the oscillating back and forth between the, well, it's like this and it's like that, but sometimes it's this other way. Both from myself and a review of Durkheim's work, one might be expecting such wishy-washiness. Let me assure you that now and later, and in fact during every second of The Woman with 1.5 Hands, the whole series that is, that in every real or imagined or hypothetical instance of rape, that every female rape victim is 0% responsible for her own rape. That never changes. Durkheim, on the other hand, shows us what can change. I propose some of his principles are transferable and, if employed, will lower American rape rates. Durkheim shows a suicide reduction of 50% if a measly 2 factors are addressed. So we're not talking about a negligible figure here. We're talking about the potential to markedly reduce instances of actual rape. One of his principles we already accept. How it relates to us now, 100 or so years after he articulated this principle, I compare to our conception of the ringleader. The ringleader of the Sharon Tate murders was never tried for murder. He was tried and convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. California authorities chose to not try for murder the man they could not place at any of the crime scenes. Instead, a path was chosen to prove in court that he talked his followers into killing that pregnant actress and a handful of others. He has a swastika tattooed in between his eyebrows, so it's not hard to imagine him as the face of evil. And there aren't many people trying to get him out of prison. In other words, we Americans acknowledge and salute the idea that sometimes 2 people can murder 1 person, one through force and coercion and from a distance, and one who's actually at the scene of the crime. Remember, the ones who manually operated those knives that fateful day did not walk. Well, or rather, they walked right into prison. And so did their ringleader. And if that's too long ago to be relevant, even though Mr. Swastika Forehead is still very much alive, anyway, if that case isn't relevant, then there's the similar ongoing lack of an effort to free that former professional football player who was convicted of being the ringleader of a group of men, only one of whom was in possession of a gun. But the one with the gun that day never played pro ball, and the one who used to play pro ball was convicted of 12 crimes related to robbery. None of those 12 felonies, however, had anything to do with him personally carrying a gun. But it was said, and it was proven and determined, proven, ruled, it was ruled. Try to do things ad lib, see what happens? But it was ruled in that Nevada courtroom that he led that ring, that he was in control of the whole operation. We accept that he was the ringleader. An overwhelming majority of Americans accept the idea that a criminal ringleader should be doing at least as much, if not more, time behind bars as those he has control over. Not too many people trying to get him out of prison as well. And again, the men he was with also landed behind bars. Some with shorter sentences because they testified against their ringleader. Gun-toter, he's out. Ringleader, still languishing. We accept it. We get it. A ringleader, however, who's actually on scene during the crime, as was the case in Nevada, is a bit different than the kind of ringleader Durkheim described. Well, enough different to garner its own scenario. Here goes. Suppose two armed men broke into a woman's home, and in the process of robbing her, they both shot her once apiece. One bullet struck her heart, the other her head. The medical examiner concluded that either bullet alone would have killed her. They both left her abode carrying items belonging to her. Soon caught, they were both tried and convicted. As their trial enters the sentencing phase, we now become involved. The writer, producer, director of these videos is a cousin of the judge, and, as it turns out, you're his next-door neighbor. Pruning your azaleas one morning, you happen to catch him on his way to court and impart a few words to him. Unbeknownst to you, he's at that very moment talking to me on his cell phone. As it pertains to this murder robbery, who's he going to listen to? Of course, neither of us. Would that judge say something like one robber can't be more than 50% responsible for her death because the other is at least 50% responsible? Of course not. Neither was willing to cut a deal with the DA, so they both were tried for and convicted of murder one. Because she was home during the robbery when she should have been at work, her not really being sick that day, playing hooky, does this somehow make her more than 0% responsible for her own death? Of course not. And this exactly transposes over into the short version, soon to be expanded, of what Durkheim says we can do. We Americans can visualize that instead of two armed men entering her home, that it's one man, and he's alone but not exactly. You see, he's also on the line with his ringleader. Yes, there's a cell phone pressed to his ear, and he's listening to his ringleader, a criminal who's calling the shots remotely. Sidebar. Again, I can't stress it enough that this is no time to start connecting the dots. I am not taking this to the place that myself and members of Terrico find abhorrent. I am not taking this to a place where any woman is ever, even slightly, responsible for her own rape. End of sidebar. Of course, in this hypothetical scenario, both men are 100% responsible for her death, and she's 0% responsible for her own death. Sometimes the cops catch the ringleader, sometimes they don't. Durkheim helps us zero in on who that ringleader is, and how to prevent or hinder him from influencing those who are suicidal. If I've read him closely enough, and if how he shows how suicide rates can be dramatically lowered has any bearing on rape prevention, Durkheim just might hold the RX for what ails America. Basically, what Durkheim did was consider that suicide was the symptom rather than the disease. Can we look at rape the same way? Can we consider that rape is a symptom of a diseased society? And if we do so, does this mean that we are lessening, or that we want to lessen, the importance of addressing this heinous symptom with all the vitriol and due diligence it deserves? No, of course not. The symptom, or rape, is definitely a sickening crime. The disease that's directly related to that symptom is equally, if not more, sickening. One more consideration. Rumor has it that certain styles of dealing with certain criminals or deviants promote or fancy, or at least allow for, the hugging and mollycoddling of said criminals/deviants, and that there's some sort of trade that happens, and that it has to happen. In other words, if applied here, that rumor would be false, and that false rumor would have it that we either keep on sending to prison the rapists, Or we instead employ these Durkheimian principles and then measure if and how much they lower rape rates. Nope. Not part of the plan. 100% complete unfounded rumor. What I'm suggesting is that we first check out what Durkheim has to offer, and if we like, that we implement a trial program, but that before, during, and after implementation of this plan, that all rapists do their time, which, as outlined in Part 4 of this series, amounts to either 23 or 25 years behind bars. What I'm saying is that we can do both, and that we do both. That we keep current corrections as they are, or increase them to my 23 or 25 year minimums. And we also determine if what Durkheim suggested regarding suicide prevention just might help us stop upwards of 50% of all rapes before they happen. Here's Durkheim. Is the way it was written in the original manuscript. For this video, however, it's not the time for Here's Durkheim, rather, it's here's the end of Part 10. For next time, in Part 11, well, that's when I actually crack open his book. That's when I start relating his topic to our topic, in earnest. One other program note. The title of this, when it was a chapter in a manuscript, was Acceptable Collateral Damage? The thing is, why I gave that chapter that title will become very evident in Part 20 of this series. I imagine that might seem out of whack to some of you, but, well, let's put it this way. In the first draft of this whole project, the 7th chapter, all about Durkheim, the one we just started, was equal in length to the first 6 chapters combined. 7, just as long as 1 through 6 combined. I don't know. It just worked out that way. So, all I can say is watch them in order. And when you get to Part 20, my question, acceptable collateral damage, will make sense. You'll see. Anyway, next time, Part 11, or Weeding Out the Fripperies.